Start the recording. And I'll turn on my camera so everyone can see me at least for a little bit. So thank you for coming out today. Hopefully we'll have a few more people rolling in. But I'm excited to have people here. So I will go ahead and, Melissa, if you want to just let everyone know again about where archive will be and introduce the week, you can.
Hi everyone, welcome to our week of live events for Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month. In the chat area, I've put the link to the Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month website, where you'll be able to have a PDF of the slides that Christine's doing. Well, the archive, once we put it up, the archive video for all the events that we're holding this week. You can also see in there a link to our YouTube channel where those events will also be seen. And you can look at them in the PG 411 archived seminar area as well. I'm going to give this over to Christine, who's going to talk to us about understanding autism.
Thank you. Let me get my PowerPoint screen sharing. And I do need to watch the waiting room. I wasn't able to turn off the waiting room for some reason. I usually kind of my seminars, but I wasn't able to here. So if anyone notices anyone in the waiting room, let me know. And let me open my chat and we'll get going. Okay, so we are starting Autism Week, as Melissa said, and I will be doing sort of an overview of autism and talking some about ways that we can help students. So I will start with the disclaimer. First, I am autistic. I found this out about a year ago. And we will talk some today about how someone can get into their 50s without realizing they're autistic. Just to let you know, any experiences I share are my own, and I don't speak for all autistic people. We are a very diverse group, and there will be a lot of generalizations I will talk about today. So just to put that out there, so, you know, if my experiences don't ring true with other people, that would be why. So I want to start with this quote that I thought was a good one. And it's not from me, but I certainly relate it to a lot of it. So it says, growing up being autistic but not knowing is just, and then it's a list of attributes basically. So hiding in your room while people are over, getting tired and needing recharge after the smallest chores, getting called a gifted kid, knowing that you're weird because people are making fun of you, but not knowing how to stop being weird, having adults tell you how mature you are, getting in trouble for not doing work, convincing yourself that you're just lazy and stupid because you can't make yourself do work, and getting really invested in weird media. And one example from my life of weird media, although it's not weird media, but it was weird because when I was 10 years old, I was obsessed with the TV show MASH, which is a little weird for a 10-year-old. So kind of the weird media thing. All right, so to give you a definition. So autism spectrum disorder is a complex condition involving persistent challenges with social communication, restricted interest, and repetitive behavior. While autism is considered a lifelong disorder, the degree of impairment in functioning because of these challenges varies between individuals with autism. So again, it's definitely a spectrum. What characteristics an individual has will vary a lot from individual to individual. All right, so some statistics. 1 in 40 children are identified with autism spectrum disorder. It's 4 times more likely to be diagnosed in boys than girls. 80% of autistic girls are not diagnosed by the age of 18. And I read some interesting genetic studies looking at genetic markers that show that autism might actually be more common in girls than it is in boys, but the diagnosis criteria is based on the characteristics that boys show. So a lot of girls do not get diagnosed. 40% of diagnosed autistics are nonverbal. You're more likely, obviously, to be diagnosed if you are nonverbal. So that statistic is probably much lower when you take into account all autistic people. Less than 40% of autistic students graduate from college. And I think the amount for neurotypical students is 60%. So students with autism are definitely at a disadvantage. And autistic people are 28 times more likely to attempt suicide than non-autistic people. So even people that are, quote, high functioning, it definitely still has a huge impact on their quality of life and can lead to wanting to commit suicide. All right, so what happens in someone that is autistic? Parts of the brain are overstimulated, and they tend to get stuck on repetitive thoughts, repetitive actions. Yeah, it's sad that so many try to commit suicide. And the parts of the brain that get overstimulated tend to be parts that are involved in either social interactions, communication, or sensory input. So those are areas that autistic people struggle with the most. Fixations we like to call them special interests, are extremely common. So saying that, you're obsessed with something in particular. It's extremely hard to switch focus from one thing to another. Transitions are very difficult. Even just going to bed or getting out of bed are huge struggles for me. It takes me, hours to get myself to go to bed, just because it's that changing, that transition, switching focus. Sensory processing problems, huge. Easily overwhelmed, often due to the sensory processing problems. And then something called autism inertia, which anyone who's autistic is probably very aware of autism inertia. Again, part of why it takes hours to actually get up and go to bed. You just sort of get stuck. It goes along with the hard to switch focus. You get stuck on whatever it is you're doing. And it's almost impossible to change what you're doing, to change that focus. All right, so let's talk about some myths of autism, because I know there's a lot of myths out there. One of the biggest ones is that it's new. So certainly diagnosis is newer. More people are being diagnosed as we get a better understanding of autism, but it's definitely not new. Even hundreds of years ago, there was people would have, Billy here, he doesn't talk much, but he's great with tending the sheep. Or, Susie, she's going to make a great housewife because she's happy to sew all day. Things like that, where maybe it was more accepted, these, special interests, the problems with socializing. But there's always been autistic people. Autistic people are obsessed with trains. This is a myth you'd see. So autistic people do have special interests. These special interests can vary a lot. It's not always trains. It's not always horses. It might be the TV show MASH. It can be anything. So I was also really into mythology as a child, Greek mythology specifically. So special interests can vary a lot, but certainly autistic people do have special interest. Rocking and flapping hands. So when a lot of people picture someone who's autistic, they picture a boy sitting on the ground, rocking back and forth and flapping their hands. These are called stims. Stims are really important for autistic people. It helps them release some of that excess energy from their brain. So remember, the brain is overstimulated, and these stims can release that excess energy. But not all stims are big. They're not all rocking back and forth or flapping hands. Stims could be things like, tapping on your leg, doing a zipper up and down repeatedly, buttoning and unbuttoning a button repeatedly, finger picking. Oh, you don't want to see my cuticles right now. Yes, that's a big one, Kathy. Yeah, playing with the spinners, scratching can be a stim. If it's something you're doing unconsciously and it's a repetitive behavior, then it's probably a stim. If it's hard for you to stop doing it, if someone brings it to your attention, but you still can't help it, that's probably a stim. My biggest ones are picking my cuticles, and if I'm wearing a hoodie, I do the zipper up and down repeatedly. There's a myth that autistic people can't make eye contact. It is uncomfortable for most autistic people to make eye contact, but it's not impossible. And certainly we can be, quote, trained to make eye contact. And then we'll tend to overdo it and make like constant eye contact, and that makes people uncomfortable. But it's because it's not a natural behavior for autistic people. So it's like too much or too little. Yes, I do too. I do the too much eye contact thing, and people get uncomfortable. All right, another myth is that autistic people only eat one food. It is true for most autistic people that they are more limited in the foods they'll eat, oftentimes due to sensory issues, particularly textures. Autistic people tend to be really particular about the texture of foods. I also read a study, an interesting one. Apparently, there is a genetic mutation that makes bitter foods taste more bitter to some people, and autistic people are much more likely to have this mutation. So for autistic people, bitter foods often do taste way more bitter than they do to non-autistic. But, you can learn to eat a variety of foods. Yeah, and I just read that recently, and I was like, oh, that explains why I don't like any fermented foods. I keep trying to eat fermented foods. They're good for you. I teach microbiology. I know they're good for you. They taste terrible to me. They're just so bitter. Right, they taste yucky. Yeah, exactly. Even kefir, all of those fermented foods, yogurt, it just all has that kind of bitter undertaste to me. But, so it's, as a child, they may be very limited to maybe just one food. But if you introduce them to multiple foods, paying attention to the textures they like and the flavors they like, you can grow up to eat a very varied diet. All right, another myth is that autistic people are blunt or they can't lie. This is, again, not true for all autistic people. It can be true for some. Definitely, even if it's true, you can learn to be less blunt. But some autistic people are really good at lying, which is just an interesting, they view it as like acting. So, varies very much. Autistic people don't like physical affection. Again, definitely a myth, not true for all autistic people. There might be certain touches certain autistic people don't like. Light touches can be bothersome for some. But yes, some are huggers. Some autistic people like really firm pressure, so they would like a really firm hug. But they might not like you stroking their arm. So definitely a myth. And another one is that autistic people lack empathy. Certainly some can. It's often found with girls that are autistic that they have extreme empathy. So these would be the kids that, have to give equal attention to every one of their stuffed animals so that none of them feel neglected. Or they can't watch, any movies that are sad because it'll completely destroy them. So autistic people can have, extreme empathy. So those are some of the myths that people tend to believe. We'll talk about some of the characteristics. I'm not going to go over all of these. And these are very much generalizations. As I was just pointing out, it can vary a lot. But boys in general, they will start showing the characteristics earlier. They will generally have larger stems, so they might do the hand flapping as opposed to the finger picking. So larger stems. They can be aggressive. Boys are more likely to avoid physical contact than girls. And then strong sense of justice. These are the kids that are always going to be hung up on what is fair. Bad handwriting, very, very common in all autistic people. And boys tend to struggle more academically than girls with autism. Now, girls with autism, much more varied. And I'm not going to go again through all of these, but autistic girls are socially motivated. They're going to have more social motivation in general than boys. So they're going to have more of a desire to fit in. So they want to be social, but they don't know how. And so your autistic girls are going to learn how to mask very early. And we'll talk more about masking in the next slide. But basically, they learn to cover up the, quote, unacceptable autistic traits at a very young age. Autistic girls will tend to have one best friend, and they will be very possessive of that friend. They won't like it if that friend spends time with other people. And that's because they found basically the one person they feel familiar with or feel comfortable with, and they don't want to lose that. Autistic girls are often labeled Thank you. Okay, I got kicked out for a second. Sorry about that. All right, autistic girls are likely to be voracious readers and to read well above their grade level. These are the kids that are going to be getting in trouble in school for reading when they're not supposed to be reading. I used to get in trouble all the time for reading at the dinner table because I didn't really want to socialize at the dinner table. I'd been at school all day and was totally burned out and needed to escape into a book for a while. But my family definitely didn't understand that. Autistic girls tend to be in the gifted program because they read, as I said, above grade level. They can be very eager to please. And so these are going to be the girls, particularly with authority figures. They're volunteering to stay in at recess and erase the chalkboard. I don't think that even exists anymore, but, things like that. They'd rather be around adults. Sure, yeah. Definitely. So yeah, they tend to rather be around adults than other children. And autistic girls can extremely overreact to criticism. Even the smallest criticism can lead to complete meltdowns. And autistic girls are way more likely to be bullied than autistic boys. And you can read these others. And then, as I said, they do tend to have smaller stems that are less noticeable. So autistic girls are much more likely to mask than boys are. And masking is hiding the characteristics to fit in, because girls tend to be more socially motivated. They're going to mask more to fit in more. And this can start at a very, very young age, particularly if they have parents that are not very accepting of their autistic traits. So they may start masking so early that they don't even know that they're masking. And this is how you can get into your 50s without realizing that you are autistic, because you started masking at such a young age that you didn't even know you were masking. Masking is very hard. It's exhausting. It leads to headaches, anxiety, depression. Autistic women are very often diagnosed. I don't know. Sorry, my internet's just being difficult right now, and I don't know why. Okay, sorry. So yeah, as I was saying, autistic women are often diagnosed with anxiety and depression when it's, yeah, I guess it is Monday, huh? When, the underlying is autism and masking. All right, so let's see if I still have that link saved. I do not. Give me a second. So I have a couple links for you. If any of this is sounding familiar to you. Right, exactly. It's rough. And if you don't realize you're doing it, then it can really be rough, because you don't understand why you always feel so tired and so bad. So the first link I put is the Autism Spectrum Quotient. It's basically just a questionnaire to kind of give you an idea if you might be on the autism spectrum. And let me grab this link. And this is specifically one about masking, and help you, if you think you might be masking, it can help you realize, the extent of masking, if that's happening. Okay, so this is, I guess you could call it an autism wheel. It has the major characteristics of autism around the side, and this is one individual's autism wheel of where they rank for each one of these characteristics. And this is to show that it's a spectrum. So you might be pretty good at eye contact, but have a lot of anxiety. Somebody else may have low anxiety, but really be bad at eye contact. And so lots of characteristics, and people can be all over the map on these characteristics and how extreme they are for different people. Okay, and then autism does come with a number of comorbidities. About a quarter of autistic people also have ADHD, which makes life doubly fun. Sleep issues are extremely common. So if you have that child that just cannot go to sleep at night, can't stay asleep, it could be due to overactive brain, basically. And the sleep issues just really never go away. GI problems. 90% of people with autism have gastrointestinal problems of some sort. And this is actually what led me into first looking into whether I might have autism or be autistic, is learning that. And I've had GI problems since I was extremely young. Depression and anxiety are very common. mostly because of society and masking and social issues. And then OCD can be common, so obsessive compulsive disorder, just going along with those repetitive behaviors. And when the repetitive behaviors kind of cross the line over into OCD. All right. So since we are a school, I wanted to talk some about the challenges and things that we can do to help autistic students. So challenges for anyone with autism, but particularly autistic students, is that autistic inertia I talked about, that inability to switch tasks. It can make it really hard to get schoolwork done. You have to stop what you're doing. You have to switch to this other task. This other task may involve multiple tasks involving switching tasks within doing the single task. And it can feel very overwhelming at times. Okay, that's great that it can be helpful. Yeah, the more you know, definitely the better. Autistic people are very prone to hyperproductivity followed by burnout. So, you might work on, let's say, an assignment for 6 hours straight. You just get this hyperproductivity. And then you burn out sometimes right in the middle of a sentence and just can't go on. And that's the end of that. Like you can't work on it anymore. And it might be days before you feel able to work on it again. So that can make just steady work very difficult. Trouble with organization and executive dysfunction. And if you're familiar with ADHD, you're also probably familiar with executive dysfunction. And I will be talking at GEC about ADD and executive dysfunction, if anyone's interested in learning more about that. So executive function, that is our capacity for self-control that allows us to sustain action and problem solving toward a goal. So this is planning, organizing, initiating tasks, keeping our attention on the task, following through, managing time, all those things that you need to finish a task. So people with autism and ADHD really struggle with executive function. I'm reading the comment, sorry. Yes. So something like stations, rotating tasks like that, extremely challenging for an autistic student, particularly if they're enjoying one of the stations, to then tell them, okay, you have to stop doing that thing you're enjoying and move to another station. That's going to be really challenging and could lead to meltdowns, particularly in younger autistic students that haven't quite learned to manage emotions yet. And that was one, I didn't point that out as a characteristic of autistic girls, but autistic girls do tend to mature socially much slower than their non-autistic counterparts. So they're going to be the girls that are still playing, make-believe or have their imaginary friends still when all of their peers are now interested in boys. So, they're going to possibly be slower. And that means they're also going to be slower at learning to manage extreme emotions and may have more meltdowns. Yeah, I can't even imagine in kindergarten, like making kids have to stop what they're doing. That would be very difficult for any autistic students. All right, so when we look specifically at challenges in school, and this was specifically university, there was a study that looked at 48 students at 3 different universities, and they found the main barriers to academic success were difficulty with mental health issues, time management and organization, so that executive function, and then unclear instructional delivery by instructors. particularly unclear assignment directions. The support that these autistic students said that they would like most to have: extra time on tests. So 84% would like extra time on tests. I know at least in the science department for most of our classes, we provide a lot of time on tests so that time restrictions won't become a stressor for students. And so as you're developing courses, that might be something to keep in mind is, don't have the time restriction be something that could cause stress. Providing copies of notes. Autistic students can have an extremely hard time listening and taking notes at the same time. So if instructors can provide copies of the notes and they can follow along with those notes during a lecture or a seminar, that can be really helpful. Academic coaching, particularly by an instructor, can be really helpful. So having an instructor basically kind of to mentor them, help them learn how to study, organize time, things like that. Right. Yeah. And that's a big problem, Kathy, is not just for autistic kids, for a lot of kids, meltdowns oftentimes are seen as being bad, being manipulative, trying to get away with things. But meltdowns are almost always overwhelmed. Their emotions have overwhelmed them. They don't know what to do with them, and they're letting it out. All right, having a writing center and tutoring, and we do provide that here at PG. That's great. Peer mentoring, so we might want to look more into peer mentoring. Weekly check-ins. So this is something instructors can do, is check in with, particularly autistic students, but students in general. We do have seminars, which is great because we can, check in with students during seminar, but maybe those students that struggle a little more, send them the weekly email, just how are you doing? Anything I can do to help. Counseling, and then support groups of specifically autistic students can be helpful. So I don't know if we have, a student support group for neurodiverse or autistic students, but that could be helpful for students. Yeah, definitely. All right, so what can we do as instructors to support our autistic students? So provide notes. If there is something you're talking about in seminar, if you're going over a difficult concept, something like that, where they really need to pay attention, providing the notes can help them pay more attention because they don't need to take notes as they're listening. Having a consistent class structure, that's one thing. Another thing that PG does really well is classes are set up pretty much the same from class to class and department to department. Things are located in the same areas. Classes basically have the same structure. You do a discussion board, you have seminars, you have assignments. There's not, every time you take a new class, you don't have to figure that class out. That can be really stressful. But also having a consistent class structure within your own class. So starting out seminars the same every time, maybe every discussion board having a post that introduces the discussion board. So some sort of pattern, routine, consistency can be helpful. Yeah, consistent seminar structure, something. I mean, even if you just start out every seminar with, welcome to the Unit 2 seminar. How is everyone doing today? That kind of gets their brain into, okay, we're in seminar, into that mode. So even, 3 sentences at the beginning can be that structure. Explaining assignments. So very important. Don't assume that your autistic students can read the assignment directions and figure out the assignment. Autistic people tend to really read into things, they are going to overthink the directions often. If something is unclear, it can totally derail them. And they can get basically hung up on that one unclear thing and be unable to move on and actually start the assignment. So going over assignments in seminar is a great thing to do because it gives students a chance to ask those questions on anything that's unclear. And I find sometimes when I'm reading the directions to the students in seminar that I'll be like, that's really not very clear. And I'll explain it more, what we're looking for. Also, making videos going over assignments can be very helpful. Less text. And this is also good for your ADD students. Just in general, less text. Less text in the classroom, less text in the seminars, less words. Big paragraphs of words are overwhelming for neurodivergent students. Use visuals when you can. Replace that text with visuals. Providing examples. And for me, examples are key. You give me an example of what you want, I can do it. I don't even need directions. Just give me the example and I will give you what you're looking for. Without an example, I can really struggle with what people are looking for. And so examples, and for example, in my classes, every class has a PowerPoint. I provide an example PowerPoint from a class I took when I was working on my MPH. So it is not an example of their assignment. It's an example of a good PowerPoint and how to do, the slides, how to do the notes section, how to put images in, how to do references, all of those things. So you can provide examples that don't give them the answers, if you know what I mean. Like you can give formatting examples, things like that, without giving them an example that they can copy as their assignment. All right, in seminar, don't require cameras and microphones. Autistic people can find being on camera or being on a microphone to be very stressful. I hate being on camera. I hate it because then I have to be hyper aware of all of my little stems and things because I don't want to be doing weird things on camera, basically. And so it requires extra energy for me to be on camera and not be weird, basically. Be flexible with deadlines. Yes, me too. As far as that comment about I prefer lecturing to names and reading the comments in real time, because having a lot of faces is distracting to me, particularly if I'm trying to read their body language and things like that. I can totally lose my train of thought just looking at all the faces. And I've gotten really good at reading comments while talking. So, all right, be flexible with deadlines, particularly because of that hyper productivity burnout thing. You may have that student that got 95% of that assignment done during a hyperactivity period, but they are so burned out right now, they cannot finish that last 5% today. They may not be able to finish it tomorrow. It might be the day after tomorrow that they can get that last 5% done. So, providing some flexibility without there needing to be, a death in the family or something. And providing reminders. This assignment is due in 2 days. So, maybe posting an announcement or sending an email reminding students it's a due in 2 days. Ideally, you've already have this much of it done. And that's really, really helpful, particularly for ADHD students, to remind them because they will have totally forgotten that assignment exists until someone reminds them it's due in 2 days. So I know we don't want to overwhelm our students with emails, but some of those reminders can be helpful. Yeah, it's a hard balance, Sarah, of what is too many emails and too many reminders, and what, you don't want to overwhelm students, but you don't want to not give them the support they need. One thing you can do is ask students, send an email in the beginning or ask students at seminar who would like these extra reminders. And you can just send the reminders to students that would like to have those reminders. And that's, one benefit of having, say, seminar on a Sunday. Most of us don't like late in the week seminars, but, it can be a nice time to be like, hey, remember, you have an assignment due in 2 days. All right, so to go along with less text, don't try to read this, but this is what my welcome to the course announcement used to look like. It's a lot of text. If I were a student and I saw this, I would be like, wow, that's a lot of text. I'm not sure if I'm going to read that. I don't do good with a lot of text. At least I broke it up into easy to digest bites. If this was all one continuous paragraph, forget it. There's no way that you can easily read something that's one paragraph. So if you're going to have a lot of text, break it up into small paragraphs. This is my current welcome to the course announcement. So a lot less text, still hits all the important things that the other one hit, but much easier to digest for a student. And then these are my unit announcements. So, really breaking it down into just what they need to know. It's a checklist, not a lot of text, pretty picture. So this is going to work better for your autistic and your ADHD students to have, less text, more visuals. All right, so for course design, if you're designing a course, what are ways we can support neurodivergent students? Less text. Visuals, providing checklist. So as an instructor, you can provide checklist. I do for a lot of my assignments in my courses, particularly if they're more complicated or they have a lot of steps. I will provide a checklist for my students. It's basically, it'll say like, did I, and then it'll list each individual thing that they need it to do, and they can actually check it off. So providing checklists, but working them into the course can be really helpful. Again, the consistent class structure, offering choice, but limited choice. So for an autistic person, decision-making can be difficult, and having too many choices can be overwhelming. But it's always good to offer students choice. It gives them ownership. And if they can pick something they're actually interested in, they're more likely to do it. So, your choice might be choose one of these 10 microbes to do your paper on. You're not giving them the choice of the entire world of microbes. That's overwhelming. But you are giving them a choice and not just saying, do a paper on this microbe. And so they can pick the one they're most interested in. Giving choice in how they do the assignment also can be really helpful. So they can choose to do a paper or a PowerPoint. Some people do much better with papers, some do much better with PowerPoints. Just, but having that choice can make them a lot more interested and excited about the assignment. Providing templates, particularly for a more complicated assignment, can be really helpful. Is it really worth them spending time figuring out formatting instead of focusing on the information? Sorry, my glasses are kind of not working. Yeah, definitely. So organizing resources by unit, things like that can be really, really helpful. And then having specific directions. So instead of saying provide examples, say provide 3 examples. Because your autistic student is going to get really hung up on provide examples. How many examples? Examples, that means more than one. Okay, is 2 enough? It doesn't say a couple of examples. Maybe they mean 3 examples, and then you can go on this spiral of how many examples do they mean by examples? So if you make it more specific, you can help students avoid that spiral. Oh, I haven't looked at the checklist feature. Oh, look at that. I just do them in a document. Oh, it's not turned on. Okay, well, that's unfortunate. And then, if your directions are things like discuss blank, you may really want to get more specific. What does discuss mean to you? Provide the definition, provide examples, like really break down what do you mean by discuss. And pointing out rubrics, I go over one of the rubrics in my first seminar because a lot of students have trouble reading the rubrics, but I know our rubrics are pretty specific and they can be used as a checklist. So, if you can go through a rubric and really show them how to read it, that can be helpful. All right, and then there are my references. So yeah, there might be a reason it's switched off. Hard to say. I didn't know that was in there. Good. That'll be good to know if we can do a checklist in the course. Yeah, so I open it up for any questions or comments. Thank you. Right, and there's more talks every day this week. But hopefully, yeah, this provided a good overview of what autism is and isn't.
And tomorrow's talk is at noon. Insight into autism. It's the effective interaction and positive support. So it's how we view our interactions with people, especially those with autistic spectrum disorder, and how the tools we can use to promote greater understanding and work towards creating an inclusive. I put in the chat our events flyer that has all the links to the events live and our website so you can go and get the archived events and look at all the resources we do have available for you.
Okay, and I will make a plug that Sarah and Susie and I will be doing a talk on autism at GEC as well. And we'll get into a few more details in that one about lending support, things like that. So if you're interested, and like I said, I'll be doing a talk on ADHD as well at GEC and ways to help our students that have ADHD. But yeah, happy to answer any questions. And if there aren't questions, thank you so much for coming. Okay, have fun, Sarah. All right, well, thank you for coming and have a great day. And I can stick around a few minutes if anyone, like I said, has any questions or anything. All right. Looks like we are done. You're very welcome, Melissa. I'll go ahead and end the seminar or in the talk, if that sounds good to you.
Much.
Okay, thank you.
And like I said, this will be on the archive area of the website and on our YouTube channel.
Okay, great. All right, I'll end it now.